Hi everyone, today my groupmate and I are going to present on application of bloodstain pattern analysis (BPA) to reconstruct a staged crime scene in a complex forensic case. So this is our group members, Adriana Farida binti Abdullah, Nur Adlina binti Abdul Manap, and me, Nurin Patricia binti Mat Tahir. To start, let's define BPA. BPA is a core forensic tool that uses science to read the blood spatters. It is not about whose blood it is, but rather how the blood got onto the surfaces. We treat blood like any fluids, studying its force and motion. This scientific approach lets us interpret the patterns, and the outcomes are vital for investigation. So what do these patterns tell us? They answer the big questions. Was it a hard or a slow drip? Was the blood cast off from the weapon? Did the victim or suspect move? Most importantly for this case, BPA determines the sequence of events. This scientific framework is what allows us to approach a complex scene with proof. Despite its power, the reliability of forensic reconstruction faces significant challenges, particularly in complex crime scenes. First, there is a high risk of misinterpretation in multi-room scenes. When we have blood distributed inconsistently across several zones, and when witnesses or subjects provide conflicting testimonies, it is very easy to incorrectly link a pattern to a specific action. The most critical challenge addressed in this paper is the problem of staging. Staging is the intentional manipulation of the scene by the perpetrator to mislead investigators. Finally, even for trained professionals, there is always the potential for cognitive bias. We may be looking for evidence to support a theory we already hold. Therefore, the methodological precision must be absolute. We must rely on the physics and geometry of the bloodstains, not on initial impressions, which is why a precise protocol is essential to detect the deliberate alteration of evidence. To prove the staging, we look for one major clue called the void pattern. Think of a void as a clean shadow left on the blood-spattered wall or floor. This shadow proved that an object was standing there when the blood was created, but when we arrived, the object was gone. So this tells us without a doubt that someone moved something after the violence happened. It is the solid physical proof that the scene was rearranged. So what was the actual case about? The scene looked like a massive bloody fight. There was a huge amount of blood spread everywhere in the house. But the person at the scene only had very small light injuries. The injuries did not match the massive amount of blood. This mismatch was the huge warning sign for the investigators. The main goal was to answer one question. Was this a real violent crime, or was the scene faked to look worse than it was? To solve this problem scientifically, they couldn't just have one person to look at the scene. They used a team approach. They had three main teams working at the same time, which are the medical team. They assessed the subject's small injuries to confirm that they truly didn't match the scene. Next one is the scene team. These are the BPA expert. They map every blood drop and piece of physical evidence. And last one is the forensic lab team that handle all the DNA and biology. By working together, these teams ensure we got the full true picture and that no single theory could bias the overall conclusion. The scene team followed a very strict plan. First, they split the entire house into zones using a grid system. This makes sure nothing is missed. Second, they classified every blood stain. They noted if it was a simple drip, a smear, or a forceful spatter. And finally, they used a high-resolution camera for detailed imaging. The forensic lab had a crucial job. They had to confirm whose blood it was. They collected samples across all those zones and ran a DNA test. The key finding was that the DNA from all the bloodstain matched only the subject at the scene. This finding is called mono-origin. So, to quickly summarize the whole method, they didn't rely on just one type of evidence. They put the physical, medical, and molecular evidence all together. By following these strict, standardized rules, they ensure that their findings were scientifically valid and could be used confidently in a legal setting. So now I will hand it over to the next presenter to discuss the case report and the subsequent result. Thank you.
In this case, the male subject reported a minor injury in his hand and claimed it was an attempt suicide. However, when the forensic team arrived, they found a large amount of blood spread across multiple rooms in the house, such as living room, corridor, bedroom, and a bedroom. Initial observations suggest inconsistency between the small superficial wound and the large volume and distribution of blood, raising a suspicion that the scene might have been staged. Thus, the clinical examination assess showed that the subject only had one superficial incised wound on the dorsal left hand. The wound had clean sharp edge and partition epithelialization with no excessive bleeding, no coagulopathy, and no secondary trauma. Vital signs were normal and the subject was fully alert. This type of wound cannot produce by the large amount of blood observed throughout the residence. So immediately, there is a strong mismatch between the injury and the blood volume, suggesting that it might be a scene manipulation. In the stairwell investigation, found transfer pattern inconsistent with normal foot movement, included heel-to-heel impression and parallel smear showing a bilateral gait. There were also vertical drip on the stair races with the round edges clean, indicate the passive drop, not a blood cast off from violence. There was no satellite spatter, meaning the blood was deposited gently, not during a dynamic or high-energy event. For the result of bloodstain at the bathroom was found on the door frame, basin, faucet handle, and the floor tiles. The pattern was mainly swipe mark and a fine vertical drop with no project or high-velocity stain that were typically associated with assault or arterial injury. So, investigators also found several containers, both glass and plastic, containing a dry blood. This strongly suggests controlled collection and deliberate placement of blood rather than spontaneous bleeding. For master bedroom blood stain mapping, the large dry blood area was found on the bed, floor, wardrobe base, wall, and around the mirror. A dense concentration on stain appeared in front of the bed. Importantly, several void patterns were present, clean, unstained, sharp, surrounded by blood. Those void matched the exact dimension of furniture item, showing that the object were moved after the blood was already deposited. This is a major indicator that this is a staged scene. Thus, when all the evidence is combined, the blood patterns show a single biological origin, and the overall distribution does not support a scenario involving an external aggressor or multiple injury. The presence of passive drip, contact transfer, void interruption, and stored blood all point toward deliberate collection and dispersion needing to simulate a violent event. So, the STR-DNA profiling confirmed that all the bloodstain in the house was matched the subject DNA with no mixed profile and no evidence of a second person. So, this supports the conclusion that the entire scene was created using the subject own blood. In summary, the clinical finding, bloodstain morphology, the void pattern, bedroom evidence, and DNA result all consistent indicate that the blood scene was staged and not the result of an actual violence assault.
Hi, my name is Adriana Farida, and now moving into the key discussion points of this case. A multidisciplinary approach was essential in uncovering the staged crime scene. By integrating bloodstain pattern analysis, DNA profiling, and clinical assessment, investigators were able to detect inconsistencies that clearly pointed to the manipulation. One of the strongest indicators was the presence of the void patterns. These voids are the clean gap within otherwise continuous bloodstain. In this case, the shapes of the voids match the bed, wardrobe, and the sofa. This showed that the furniture had been moved after the blood was deposited. Essentially, these patterns reveal deliberate tampering rather than genuine violent activity. When we look at the bloodstain characteristics themselves, most patterns across bedroom, stairwell, and the bathroom were passive in nature, such as drape, swipe, and transfer. There were no projected or arterial stains which would normally be seen in dynamic or high-energy events. The uniform distribution of blood also suggested controlling pouring rather than bloodshed from an actual attack. Next, in terms of interpretation and overall forensic importance, DNA profiling played a major role. STR analysis confirmed that all the blood came from one person, subject himself. Investigators also discovered the blood stored inside a container, strongly suggesting that the blood had been collected and redistributed intentionally. When these findings were combined with the clinical examination and the morphology of the stains, it became evident that the event was entirely staged. This case highlights how a scene that appears extremely violent at first glance can be misleading without proper scientific analysis. Void patterns again stood out as a powerful markers for staging and object manipulation, reinforcing the need to interpret the bloodstain within a broader forensic context rather than relying solely on visual impression. From this case, several important takeaways emerge. First, accurate reconstruction depends on high-quality photographic documentation, especially macro images that capture stain edges, droplet size, and spatial relationships. This level of details is crucial for proper BPA interpretation. Second, investigators must understand voids, stain morphology, and distribution patterns to differentiate between authentic violence and staged scenarios. And finally, this case reinforced that a multidisciplinary evidence-based approach is essential. No single technique can provide the full picture, so collaboration across forensic areas is needed for reliable conclusions. Although bloodstain pattern analysis is a powerful tool, there are still areas that can be improved. One key improvement is standardization. Developing and enforcing uniform BPA protocols, terminology, and validation standards can reduce ambiguity and minimize error in classification. Controlled experiments and updated guidelines can further strengthen the analytical consistency. Another improvement is interdisciplinary integration, combining BPA with DNA analysis, pathology, toxicology, and behavioral assessment allows investigators to match blood patterns with injury characteristics and contextual evidence. This helps expose inconsistencies that may indicate staging. Lastly, environmental control and void detection are essential. Recording ambience such as temperature, humidity, and airflows help interpret drying times and stain behavior. Actively searching for voids, especially those matching moved objects, can provide for important clues about post-event manipulation. In conclusion, this case shows how a multidisciplinary forensic approach can uncover staged crime scene. Bloodstain pattern analysis, DNA profiling, and clinical findings together reveal that the scene had been manipulated. Void patterns help identify object movement and post-incident alterations, while consistent bloodstains and DNA match stored blood supported the conclusion of a fabricated event. The case highlights the value of combining BPA expertise with broader contextual analysis, the need for strong training and collaboration for accurate crime scene reconstruction. And that's all from us. Thank you.